This is Product by Design, a podcast by Prodity, where we explore technology, artificial intelligence, user experience, product management, and the philosophy of building products and companies. All right, welcome back to another episode of Product by Design. I am Kyle, and this week we've got another awesome guest with us, Dr. Lorenzo Conti. Look, Dr. Lorenzo Conti, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kyle. Delighted to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Let me do a brief introduction for you, and then you can tell us a little bit more about yourself. But Lorenzo is a founder and managing director of Crover Ltd, a Scotland-based startup that has developed the world's first subterranean drone, i.e. a Crover, that we'll talk a lot more about. But with that, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your experience?
I had a bit of an unusual path to becoming an entrepreneur. It was something that wasn't really ever on my mind. I was, more on the path to, the scientific and academic field. I was doing a PhD in the field of granular materials at the University of Edinburgh, specifically looking at local effects in granular media. So when you have something happening at a certain point in space, in environments like sand dunes or grain bulks, powders, and so on, that affects a different point in space, mostly on the kind of mathematical modeling side of things, also using quite a lot the UK national supercomputer, which we're very lucky to have here in Edinburgh. And then just kind of out of a bit of a spell of luck, one day I had an intuition. I set up a bit of simulations and experiments at home to check that idea, and that eventually led to noticing for the first time a novel effect, what we like to call the Crover effect now, that enables movement or locomotion when fully buried, so below the surface of granular assemblies, again, like, anything from sand dunes to grain silos.
Interesting. And I'm excited to talk about that because it's something that I don't think we probably think much about, but has a lot of applications and the way that you're applying it now. But before we dive into that, I'm interested in, obviously you have a company, you're kind of applying some of these things that you're doing, but outside of that, is there anything that you like to do outside of the company that you're doing and some of the work that you're doing in the field?
I mean, I say there are things that I used to enjoy doing outside of what we're doing at Crover. Since starting the company, that's really been the thing that takes pretty much all my time. My girlfriend has been very understanding of and supportive of all of that. I don't think many other people would have been. And, I'm just lucky to have enough support around to make that possible and let me kind of focus on our company's mission. But yeah, it's been a few years now since we started. I like at some point to get back to, playing football, skiing, cooking. I started picking up again a little bit recently, but especially since I'm originally from Italy, so people tend to ask me to cook Italian dishes all the time. But really, I enjoy the things that we do at Crover so much that it, sometimes is also something that I just like to do for most of my time.
Yeah, no, that's great. Do you have, when you have time or have a chance to cook, do you have a favorite Italian dish that you like to go to?
People tend to like my tiramisu, but I mean, I'm discovered I'm slightly intolerant to lactose and eggs, and so that's probably the worst combination of ingredients in a tiramisu. But yeah, we got into like pizza making recently, so that's somewhat easier than it might look like.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, I want to know a little bit more about your journey. You kind of touched on it a little bit briefly, and how you started kind of down this path, at the University of Edinburgh, and looking at some of the movement of sand and other grains in particular. But how did you get going down this path, and then what eventually led you to kind of turning this into a company, into Crover specifically?
Yeah, so initially it wasn't really something that I had on the horizon. it just kind of happened that at the University of Edinburgh, they've got quite a strong support system for students and academics looking to turn the research into commercial companies. And coincidentally, before kind of disclosing the idea publicly, someone mentioned that I might want to speak to one of the university advisors that advises students, and I just ended up in this meeting where I didn't really know who I was talking to and why, but that kind of eventually led to meeting and establish a good relationship with one of the advisors, one of the startup advisors at the university, who over the course of several months kind of guiding me through the first steps of setting up a company. And it just became the kind of situation where it was pretty obvious that starting a company was the obvious way to go. It wasn't, it was the way to potentially fulfill the potential for social, environmental benefits and commercial ones as well that the technology had potential for. And so, from that point, I just kind of committed myself to creating that. And also starting off as a solo founder, has been pretty tricky. I think one of the things that, or possibly the things that took the most time, especially initially, was gathering enough money and people. And the two things, come kind of hand in hand, because you can't get people without the money, to then turn that basic physical effect into a product. And that's really the thing that took the most time, especially since there wasn't anything out there similar to what we were doing. And so we had to figure it all out on our own and write the guidebook, pretty much all the parts of the system, all the electronics, design all the mechanical parts of the system, the software, pretty much everything. Most of the modules that are out there are designed for other types of applications. They didn't really meet our requirements. And so we had to design from scratch almost everything that is on our system. And that just took quite a lot of time and people, but we've gotten to the point where the basic version of the system is getting mature enough for a wider commercial deployment. We're just going through the certification process, which once complete is going to enable us to, finally get the product more widely out there as well. And we were talking just before this, Kyle, about the US as well. That's obviously the biggest market for us, and we're making the first steps from Scotland towards there. And hopefully towards in the second half of this year, we're planning a lot of good things there and in other places as well.
That's great. And there's a couple of things I want to dive into that you've touched on. But first, let's talk a little bit about specifically what is Crover and what is it that you're doing there, because you've kind of touched on your research and the things that kind of brought you to that. But what is it that you found, and how is it that you're applying some of the things that you're researching into the company, and what is it that you've built and are doing?
It's I think there's a lot of things that converge into going from that idea to a product. Obviously, you want to communicate constantly with customers. And then in our case, we're talking about grain, but there's a very wide variety of types of people and companies that store grain. From your local farmer with maybe like a small amount of grain that they keep for a short period of time, to the centralized port operators with maybe multiple ports across the country that store very large bulks, some of which stay in there for long periods of time, maybe 2 years even, and others that move really fast, dealing even with cargo ships and things like that. So just like making sure that all these different requirements are incorporated in one product, so that you don't have to develop 100 different products for every little niche use that each customer might make, has also been something that has been taking us quite a bit of time. We think we found some good ways to incorporate things in a way that can fit most of the requirements that we've been hearing about and getting feedback on. And there's probably still a lot more than we can work on the future. So I think it's one of those things that as a product gets more mature, then it can satisfy a wider range of requirements and a wider range of customers. And then, its adoption also grows as a result of that.
That's really interesting. So, as a product person myself, I love kind of talking about this because it's obviously one of the most important things. So you have basically a robotic drone that you put into grain silos that goes through, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about some of the things that it's measuring and doing as it goes through. And then I'm fascinated by some of the feedback process that you go through as you get more and more customers and more users who are implementing this. So I guess that's kind of multiple parts. Tell us maybe about some of the use cases that you have seen so far as you have put this drone out. What is it that it's doing initially within some of these grain silos, and then maybe what have been some of the feedback and things that you've gotten, and kind of like you mentioned, how have you been implementing some of those things in order to expand some of those use cases, is in order to broaden, I guess, the spectrum of things that your drone can do into more and more, I guess, grain silos or even other areas within the agricultural market or agricultural sector.
Yeah, so the device, it moves through bulks of grain, and whether, like you were saying, like a silo, or if anything, like right now is possibly more suited for flat storage type of situations, which are often even larger bulks that you might find a port, or in kind of drier areas typically. Funny enough, is the most common type of storage here in Scotland, even though it's quite a wet area. And as it's moving through, it takes measurements of temperature, moisture, and we're working on adding other parameters as well. We should have one additional parameter, which we will probably announce soon in the next month. And then it measures that at multiple points so that we can build effectively a 3D map of conditions within these large and dense pools, so that people can identify problems like hot spots or wet spots early, and in the end, can become a decision tool for them as well. Do I sell the grain now, or how much time do I have until I've got to move it, or or it's going to spoil. Where is the area with the best quality stuff that maybe I can use for the top end type of milling products, and where's maybe the lower quality stuff that I can send for feed. Because up till now, people really like consider every single silo or shed as like one uniform bulk of the same type of stuff. But in reality, first of all, they don't all come in at the same time, so you've got layers, and also, things can start from an area and spread depending on the local conditions. So it ties with what people call integrated pest management, which in grain storage means keeping an accurate eye on the condition of the grain, like temperature and moisture, keeping those parameters within a safe range that prevents infestations like molds and insects from growing. Because obviously, anything that comes from the field will have some certain amount of spores or eggs that, if it's dry and cold enough, they will not grow. But if it gets hot or wet, they will start growing and then reproducing, and in turn it starts a bit of a kind of cyclic mechanism where the more these things grow, the hotter it gets locally, and the faster the rate of growth increases. So it's really key to kind of identify these problems early, before you get to a point where they're growing really fast and there's not very much that you can do, or they've affected most of your bulk. The problem is that at the moment, like really the only options is either sending a person with a manual probe working on that bulk, which is pretty dangerous as well. Entrapment is a pretty bad way to go, and unfortunately, it still happens. And or having like static sensors in there, which are pretty limited, because both from a kind of practical and economic point of view, it's not feasible to have enough of those sensors to kind of capture every area within the bulk. And we've come across, even places that had like 100 sensors per silo that weren't spotting problems in between each sensor, and we're saying, okay, we need something better than this. And I mean, that's a very large investment already that they've made. So in the end, it can also be cheaper than the alternative for getting an accurate option, because it's proposing is not as cheap as the manual probes, obviously, but it's cheaper than having 100 sensors, and usually it's comparable to having 20 sensors in place, and can give you a better picture of what's going on in there. But when you were asking about feedback that we got, and things that led to changes, there's been a lot, but I think the one that I like the most is, and that was a bit of an unexpected one. So we started off with sensing, but then a lot of people just out of the blue started asking us for sampling as well. So for the ability to collect a physical sample from the bulk and retrieve that, whether it's for traceability purposes, or because they need to show it to their buyer or their seller, or to carry out further analysis in the lab. And that's something that regularly needs to be done, for instance, on cargo ships when they arrive at a port. And that was really something that initially we didn't plan for, but it was really like customer driven. Like we just kept on getting so many people asking for that we started the development of that, and now we've got a sampling module that is getting more mature. We've been lucky enough to get support from Innovate UK as well, which is a kind of organization here in the UK supporting R&D. That gave us just recently some follow-on funding to continue the development. And we're getting closer to have a commercial version ready of the sampling module as well. And that's really, possibly becoming even more popular than the basic sensing version. And that was, really entirely customer driven.
That's really interesting. And I feel like really hits home to the point of so many of the things that we create, especially again going back to that idea of as product people, and as we develop new technologies and new products, that so many of the things I feel like for me too become are unexpected, customer driven insights where we can create these products or these technologies, but so often it will be those things that we didn't expect or didn't know that customers needed until we create something and it goes out there, and then they're like, customers use it and they're like, wow, this is awesome, I really need this thing, and this would really change it because of this other thing that we do. And to then start to incorporate that, I mean, it just kind of speaks to why it's so important to continually get that feedback and understand how people are using the products so that you can continually improve it. So I think that's really great. I'm interested that this idea of a drone or a robot for grain storage and grain use in particular. So you kind of touched on the point that we have been using probes or manual sampling and manual testing for a lot of this for a while. What was kind of the impetus for a drone or a robot, or for something really different in order to do kind of this sampling of grain and of silos? Because we have some of these robots and drones in other areas, and we're starting to see that more. But this was something that, like you mentioned, was kind of a completely new thing for this area. What was kind of the driving force behind really moving into this, and a new technology and a new way of doing it that nobody had really done before?
I would probably start from the word drone itself, because usually, people think about a drone as something that flies, and I think that that's really still the main connotation of that word. So I should probably clarify that our device or robot doesn't really fly, so it's technically not really a drone. But drone is a word that people know for a sort of robot or device that moves. And like the peculiar thing about our robot is that it moves through kind of solid granular media. So it effectively burrows itself underground, but in a non-destructive manner. It's not like a mole or something else that kind of breaks the material in front, like, like digging machines. And obviously that's important because you don't want to manage the grain that you're moving through. It's all about maintaining its quality. And so I think it's one of those situations where, like a lot of people knew for a long time what the ideal situation would be, but just like the technology to make it possible to move through granular media just didn't exist. And it's not that people didn't really try. Like, if you look in the literatures, there's a variety of attempts to design devices that would use kind of more classical mechanisms to move through granular media, and especially below the surface, either using undulatory motion, which is a bit like a snake, or peristaltic motion, like a worm does, so by in turn contracting and extending different parts of the body of the device, or even more simple terms like kind of pushing backwards to move forward. And the limitation with all these methods is that when you start applying, like you're trying to create some forward motion in granular media, if the material around it is sort of all compact and what we call like a kind of quasi-static shape, then you require like very large forces to overcome them. Like the material in there cannot really move as easily as a fluid. And so it's just not practically feasible to to have enough force to move through when the entire device is buried underground. So like before we managed to demonstrate our first proof of concept robot, like the farthest that anyone got was to get a little kind of crab like to like kind of wiggle a little bit around, or possibly the other example is like a sort of snake like robot by some researchers at Georgia Tech who did some pretty good work, had some interesting stuff, but the limitation there was that the robot had to be still pushed from the outside through like kind of some rods stuck on the robot to be able to move forward, and it would still only be able to move in kind of very light synthetic particles, just a few centimeters from the bottom. So it wasn't really like kind of self-propelled in a sense. I think really the bit that we the barrier that we overcame is like enabling a device to move itself within this type of environments, where there wasn't really an option. And I think that just when we're talking about enabling technologies and things like that, it's just like kind of breaking the barrier, and then like the range of possibilities that you've got after the barrier is broken is quite a lot. At the same time, it comes with a lot of challenges, because you've got to figure out all the other issues that come with the new technology and that no one else has ever seen before, and you've got to like sort them out all on your own. But beyond grain storage, I think there's a lot of other things that we can do as well, other problems that are widely known and for which there aren't really solutions, that once we have the time and resources to dedicate to them, we would love to tackle.
I think that's fascinating. I'd be interested in, I guess, some of those next phases. So, where do you see, I guess, first off, where do you see this going as far as the grain technology and some of the next steps as far as agriculture and other applications within this sector? And then beyond, how do you see, this technology and what you're developing expanding into other areas and other possible use cases?
The main focus at the moment is kind of getting the product fully certified and ready for manufacturing, so that we can get it in the hands of more people and start having more of that the social and environmental impact that is really like kind of the big reason why we decided to start with the grain storage market compared to other potentially less sustainable areas where our robot could be applied to as well. But like the very first idea that I had before when I discovered the physical effect was to potentially apply that technology and robot for space exploration. That's something that I love to do as a kind of personal thing in the future. But I know that at the same time, from a company perspective, is a very long term type of project. Is not the one that would return the highest profits in a reasonable amount of years. And so like as a company, the focus right now, especially in the current financial climate and all the challenges in raising money without profitability at the moment, is on getting to the point where the company is making a good enough amount of sales and is profitable. And then beyond that, we can think about other areas. But at the same time, we've been designing the robot so that it can work well enough in a wide range of ground materials. Every so often we get asked by people to test it in anything from wood pellets to pebbles and minerals. And most of the things that we tested in so far, it is able to move through. And then it becomes a problem of what sensors need to be fitted on the robot for that specific applications, what other features does it need to have. And so the idea is to eventually because also we can't tackle every single problem ourselves, is to eventually like offer the robot also as a platform for other people to develop their own bespoke implementation for.
Awesome. Well, that sounds really interesting. And kind of like you mentioned before too, we talked about how your primary focus right now has been on Scotland and a little bit in Italy as well, but expanding into possibly the United States and other areas. Where do you see both the areas that you want to expand to, and where do you see the biggest benefits of this being what you're developing right now for people in agriculture, for farmers, for grain storage in general. Obviously expanding into the United States, you said, but where potentially do you see expanding after that?
Yeah, the North American market from a commercial point of view is it's definitely the biggest opportunity for us. Coming from the UK as a company initially, set up and incorporated here, it's a relatively small market compared to a lot of other places. I mean, it's the number five market in terms of grain in Europe. Is even lower on the list if we look at a global scale. And so that's really why we were looking for an opportunity to get closer to where the biggest market for us is. And so yes, we are in the process of incorporated a US subsidiary. We should have the first full-time US team-based member starting in about a month's time. So there's quite a lot of things happening at the moment to make all of that possible. And then we are lucky to have the opportunity to start some work there and work with some good partners that are making that possible. But yeah, at the same time, it is a global market. The grain storage market is also one of those situations where every country stores grain, all sort of places, and we just have to kind of decide a bit sometimes where to focus and dedicate our resources. So for this year, the focus is still going to be just kind of expanding a bit our operations both in the UK and Europe, and then moving the first steps in
Okay. No, that makes sense. I'm interested in maybe what you found, some of the differences in establishing a company in the UK versus what you're finding as you kind of expand into other places like the United States. What have been some of the challenges, or maybe some of the things that you didn't expect, both as you've established a company and then as you've expanded it internationally?
Yeah, we're still learning about that. I mean, the whole kind of country expansion bit, it's a very recent thing. It was a decision made at the end of November, really, as we got a bit of US investment and some other kind of commitment there to make it possible. So yeah, we're still going through the process. One thing I'm noticing is that there's a lot of things that in the end are done in a very similar way, but just you know what it is like with like kind of US English and like British English. It's, people like to use different words, and when it comes to like running companies and all the admin of it, it's like a lot of the processes are very very similar. Just people use entirely different words to mean the exact same thing, and sometimes the exact same word means something entirely different. And I think that that's that's possibly one of the main confusions we're dealing with now. But it's very interesting. I have to say, that's one of the things that I'm enjoying the most, going through the process, just learning about it, and yeah, discovering all the new stuff. It's like, when you've got a new toy and you're like, oh, there's all these other cool things that you can do with it. Yeah, it's just very interesting to learn how it works and see the different perspectives.
Have you had the chance to get feedback from anybody in the United States? Is that something that people have started using it in the US? And are there differences in product usage and grain storage in the US versus in the UK? Or is it similar in how people operate and there's not too many differences? I'm kind of curious, like from a product and technology perspective, like are there significant differences from country and location, or have you found it to be pretty similar so far?
Yeah, some very substantial differences. So I think maybe one limitation that we had is the fact that we we had been lucky to have a lot of interactions like across Europe, and so we kind of know by now how different storage operators in very different countries across Europe tend to do things. But then our interactions with like kind of the US market had been very limited, and because of the geographic distance, we hadn't been able until some months ago to really kind of spend some time on the ground, and respond to some of the inbound inquiries that we were getting there. But we, through an organization called Grow New York, we had the opportunity to, spend a decent amount of time in there between like October and November last year, which enabled us to, connect with some of the ecosystem there, like do a bit of basic tests and investigations, and that led to some new opportunities that now we're following up on, and also we're just kind of following up on some of the interest that we'd received over time and that we just couldn't really do something about. Where we were getting people wanting to use the robot, wanting to buy X number of them, and we were just like, well, sorry, we are in Edinburgh, we don't have enough units, we can't send one over to you. So now it's just about making that possible and taking those relationships forward.
That's interesting. I'm curious, how have you been finding and maybe filtering some of these very early adopting customers? Because it sounds like you have a number of early adopting customers and interest and those types of users who potentially are willing to use what could be the early versions of your product as you continue to develop and add a lot of these features that they're interested in. um, because at least I've found, and I'd be interested in your insight here, that as I've created very early versions of products, they're not necessarily fully fledged with all of the features that we want. And there are lots of customers who are very much okay with that and want the features that are available and then are willing to help us add features as we go along and give feedback and continue to make it better. And then there are the other customers who want the more, I guess, fully feature complete type products. And I guess how have you been approaching that? And it sounds like there are lots and lots of users and customers who are ready for something that's much better than they have currently. How have you been seeing that? What has been your approach, and how have you been differentiating between some of these different types of customers?
Yeah, 100%. I think one nice aspect of getting a lot of interest from early on is that then you can then be selective in terms of, who's the best customer to work with initially. And so at that point, if you're in that situation, is a really nice position, because then you can say, okay, we'll work only with those guys who, like you said, are happy with those limited features, are able to provide full feedback and support, potentially help out through the journey as well. And so you almost kind of end up making a priority list of, who are we working with first, and, who's going to come after that. And it's not because you don't want to work with everyone that comes along, but it's just because initially you don't have the resources to work with all of them, right? So you got to be a bit selective. Obviously, it gets a bit trickier if you don't have that option. I mean, in our case, we were lucky enough to have the situation. So we've been working primarily with a few selected partners who were, through interactions. And I mean, you get to learn to get to know people over time, but it became clear that they were that kind of ideal early adopter, like you said. And I mean, in terms of that, we were still talking mostly about, the ones in the, in the UK and Italy that we've been working with the most. And I think, in terms of the US, we're still kind of building a bit our base in there. And like we said before, there's still some modifications that we need to make to the system to make it fit better the way grain storage is done. Obviously, as you mentioned, silos are way more common in the US than they are in Scotland. So that's probably a main one, making sure that people don't have to, open and close the silo continuously, put the robo in and out. That's obviously a very big one. But also that there's, fine little details, talking bushels instead of tons, like, like a lot of little things that some of which are fairly small, but then, when you start building your list, is all things that take a bit of time to fix before it fully meets the way people are dealing with their grain storage operations.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's really interesting. I'm interested too in what you've found, not just from the product and technology standpoint, but as you've been building a business, from the start, and as you kind of decided to take this journey, what have been some of the things that you found to maybe be the most unexpected, the most challenging, the most exciting? Because you kind of mentioned that this wasn't necessarily the path that you set out on, but it is definitely the one that you chose and are going down now. What have been some of the things that you have either enjoyed the most or found the most surprising about starting a company and starting Crover, and kind of walking down this path of a new company?
So if I have to be honest, like the moment, like I had sort of discovered the physical effect and realized the potential that it could have, and decided to start a startup, I thought that the art part was done. And I think that's probably like a mistake that is very common at that stage, right? Because you're like, okay, we've got some cool technology, like the way the media and Hollywood and everything like portrays the startup journey, or the company building journey. It just looks like someone goes from that moment to, you know right, being to the point that they've got more money than that they know what to do, right? And it's just like everything in between. There's actually like so much that you can't even realize. And so, like understand much more like now why, um, like, why people value others that have built a business before and been successful with it, because it's the kind of thing that after you've done it once, like, you know what you need to do. There's much less of that whole kind of learning process, failing that takes, that takes time and resources, right? So it's something that, as a first time founder, I had to go through, like make mistakes along the way. And, we've been getting better at it. I mean, now we're making much less mistakes, but then like, there's new things that we never came across all the time, and we just have to be kind of flexible, to to learn new things constantly, and try to assess every possible scenario. I mean, that's something that I constantly think about is, what are all the possible things that could happen, and like what are all the precautions that we can take to reduce risk in a way, because building a company is already a risky business enough, but in the end, like I think my job as the head of the company is to really constantly find ways and put together plans that will reduce that risk to a minimum, not eliminate it entirely because that's not really possible. And so, yeah, just I usually like tell people that like the probably like the main thing they want to make sure before starting a company is that is like they are 100% sure it is the kind of thing that they will be committed to for at the very least 5 to 10 years. Usually, like I mean, a lot of times more as well, and that they, they're not gonna give up along the way because like problems are gonna rise, and it's just that resilience of you know fixing problems, finding solutions in like the trickiest of moments, and not getting disheartened. It's then kind of the what leads to success. I think we've seen here in Edinburgh like a lot of companies going through like a very positive initial stage, but then a lot of times just like founders they lose that energy, like maybe like a couple of years in, and they just go off and do something else because they're not kind of millionaires enough, and that's just something that if people knew initially, it could maybe you know prevent them a bit of wasted time.
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on. And that's great. It's great insight and great advice because I think that it is, like you said, it's not like it's portrayed, as in the idea is the hard part. And then having the advice of it is, you have to just know that you're going to be in it for a long time in order to do it and get started. I think that's just that's really really good. Well, Lorenzo, this has been a really, really fun and fascinating conversation. Um, is there anything that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you wanted to mention?
Probably just mentioning briefly, we made a lot of choices through the journey. I think one of those was kind of the domain that we're using for our website, like a tech domain. Almost became a part of our brand, and it got to the point where a lot of people just think that it's part of our company name, and it is kind of beneficial in that sense because as a deep tech company, just really our technology is our core, is what differentiates us from the rest of the market, and so it's been really helpful in that sense.
That's great. And I do have a couple of wrap up questions that I want to ask just as we get things finished up. But before we do that, where can people find more about you, about Crover, about all the things that we talked about?
So our website is crover.tech. They can reach out to us at info@crover.tech via email. And yeah, we're always happy to hear from new people, whatever their interest may be.
Awesome. And we'll put those links in the show notes as well so you can check that out. Well, we'd like to just wrap up with a couple of less business related questions, but they can be business or tech related if you'd like. But is there anything that you have been reading, watching, or listening to lately that you found interesting or would like to share?
Cool. Um, like product related or just in general?
It doesn't have to be product or business or tech related. It can be absolutely anything.
You know what? I've been struggling lately to find a good movie. So if you've got any recommendations, I'd be very happy to know. But yeah, nothing comes to mind right now. But yeah, it's just because I've been really busy with like reading like mostly business material and like technical guides and on say like US incorporation and things like that. There's a really good guide on Medium out there. I can't remember the name of the author, but on for UK companies looking to establish some operations in the US and also on raising money in the US, which is really helpful for us. And so I really recommend searching for that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll maybe take a look and get that in the show notes. For anybody who is in the UK and looking to establish in the US, maybe not the most exciting read, but I'm sure it's a really helpful one. So that will be good. And then if there's any products that you're using that you have found particularly useful or good, it can be a physical product or a digital product.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of things. I mean, something that we struggled with a lot initially was like kind of getting our electronics design into like a very mature stage. So I kind of resisted for quite some time, getting kind of some expensive PCB design and electronics design software in place. But I have to say, like since we got our team to use Altium, it's been really helpful. So it's probably like it's by far the most expensive license that we're paying for, but it seems to be
nice. Great. All right. Well, Lorenzo, again, this has been a great conversation. Appreciate all of your insight. And it's been fascinating to learn more about Crover, about some of the technology within the grain and agricultural industry, which isn't something that I have thought a lot about previously, but has been absolutely fascinating for me because I think it's something that is always behind the scenes for us, but is, I think, relevant to all of us. So really, again, appreciate all of your insights, and I'm excited to see where your company goes, and hopefully here in the US in the not too distant future.
Thank you, Kyle.
All right. And thank you everyone for listening. Thanks again for listening. If you like the show, be sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can follow the show on TikTok at Prodity.co and on Twitter at ProdityCo. You can also follow me on both of those platforms at Kyle Larry Evans. If you want more product conversation, check out my newsletter Prodity at Prodity.co. You can also follow me on Medium at Kyle Larry Evans, or check out my Medium publication Prodity. Of course, you can check out all these links in the show notes.